What's going on, everybody? JHow here, and in this Apex Legends video, we're going to go over the gun tier list for Season 7, ranking the guns from the worst to the best, and there's going to be some massive changes in this season, most notably the R99 coming back to be ground loot, but also some tweaks to some other guns, so let's get into it. It goes without saying that the Mozambique is still the worst gun in the game, and the P2020 is slightly above it. Hammer points on these guns make them both, of course, viable in the right situation, but most of the time you're never going to see anybody saying, you know what, I'm running this and something else. And as I say every season, the number one reason is that first gun that you have should be the killer, and the second one should be the finisher, or the first one just does both. If you're looking at an R99 with a level 3 mag, that's pretty much all you need. But if you're looking for a gun secondly, it shows that you're not hitting your shots initially with your opener gun, and then all of a sudden you need a little bit of extra impact to do, say, 100 damage after. Should be doing more than 100 damage with your first gun, thus leaving any gun to be cleanup, but you also want that gun to be able to do more should a second person show up, and then you can use that second gun to take care of both, which is why a Peacekeeper or really any other gun other than something that's used as a non-shield gun to be your secondary. Okay, let's talk about some of these snipers, because we did see the triple take off in Season 6, and that is still going to be at a higher tier. Right now, the charge rifle and the longbow still C tier guns. Now, I'll say this, that with the arrival of Olympus, charge rifles tend to be much better because there's a lot of sight lines, a lot of different areas where you can get longer range shots. And so the longbow, to me, actually is a higher ranked gun because of this. But I think that as the season goes on, you're going to see different rotations and different things to where I don't want to put the longbow too high. The charge rifle, we haven't seen it be OP since its release, and it's been nerfed so much that I think a healthy C tier is where it's at, with the longbow kind of on the verge of being a B tier sniper rifle. But right now, we'll leave that for a couple of other things. As far as another sniper rifle goes, the Sentinel, instead of just cracking shields with the meme of, well, why don't you just aim higher, as in get the headshot to get that bonus damage and just trying to take off shields, now the Sentinel has a different aspect. With the armor being slightly more difficult to get red, it does mean that, well, not everybody has red shields. And so with that, you're going to see more blue shields as a result, and potentially moving up into that purple range. So now they've buffed the damage to where it's 88 damage when it's charged up. And therefore, because the Sentinel has a 2x multiplier on headshots, that means that a 2x equals 176. Conveniently enough, a blue shield is 75 armor and you have 100 health. Therefore, a headshot against blue armor is actually a one-shot knock. That means the Sentinel now has potential to go up in rank. Now, they've buffed the fire rate and some rechamber times over the last season plus, and that does mean that it has gotten better. I just don't know if it's ready to be put into a B tier, but I will say this is the gun, much like the triple take last season, that has potential to be like, you know what, maybe this is too much. I do think as the game goes on in the late game, you drop your sniper rifles, thus making the Sentinel less valuable against purple armor. You know, you take one shot with that, you normally duck and cover and go somewhere else. And so right now the Sentinel is kind of up there in that upper echelon of sniper rifles, getting close to the triple take. But right now, the Sentinel is a gun I have my eyes on to potentially move up as the season goes on. Other guns at the C tier, the Spitfire. We actually saw some changes to the Spitfire right before Season 6 ended, and I really like those changes. And for what it's worth, the Spitfire does feel really good. For some people, you might like this over some of the energy guns that are going to be at your B tier, and so I don't really blame you if you want to move this up to the B tier. I'm going to be honest with you guys, a lot of times when I'm not playing ranked games, I love running a Spitfire. If you ever stop by stream, I'm probably playing a Spitfire because I think it's so fun. I'll throw a 2 or 3x on that bad boy and go to town with it. So I think the Spitfire does kind of potentially fit on the cusp of the B tier, but the Flatline kind of says, you know what? I'm a little bit better, and that's why I normally keep the Spitfire a little lower, but I think if you want to argue it's a B tier gun, I don't blame you. Now we move over to the RE45. The RE45 is one that the RE45 users, every time I put out a video, you love this gun. You'll always swear that this is a good gun. And I really think that the recoil on this thing is super easy to control. Now with the quick draw hop up, it means that you can switch to this gun very quickly, and it's really good for close quarters in those early fights. Now I think with the hop up, it does kind of fit into that B category as a secondary gun, but I think normally you're going to already have an R9 and R301, something to kind of mask the fact that you need that quick draw over there, and you can put different items on it. So the RE45 I think is a great secondary gun with the hop up. It's a great secondary gun already. But with that hop up does make it a lot stronger for those quick fights, and it might eke out that extra 10-20 damage that you need to trade with that person that you're in close quarters with. It even has a nice, because the recoil is so easy, you can basically just use this at any short to medium range and feel pretty good about it. But still, I think this is a C tier gun with the potential to be kind of on that lower B tier. Now, as we move to the B tier, let's look at basically the counterpart to the RE45, the alternator. The alternator is one of the favorite guns for a lot of people because the recoil is so easy. The reason why I think the RE45 could potentially outperform this is because it has a higher fire rate, and because the RE45 with the buffs to it do make it a lot stronger. One thing though, with this season, the alternator is part of that gold gun package that's out there right now, so we have been seeing a lot of gold alternators in the loot boxes, other people picking them up, and a lot of gold alternators being used. I still don't think it competes with the R99, but this is a very competitive gun that a lot of people love picking up early. So if you're on the fence of, I think the RE45 is better than the alternator, I agree, it can be there. And if you're on the fence of the alternator is just easier to control and better accuracy, especially hip fire accuracy, and you think it's better and it belongs here, I think that there's kind of that argument between those two guns. But once we start to look beyond those two guns, we see that there's a lot better guns to play with. Now let's talk about energy guns, because right now I think that your assault rifle, energy guns all belong here. Your Devotion, your L-Star, and your Havoc. Now, let's talk about them each specifically. The L-Star is a gun I probably have been flexing with the most just to kind of test it. We've seen changes to its recoil pattern. The damage on this is absurd. It has a 2x multiplier on headshots, meaning that it can really turn a fight very quickly if you can control that. It's easier to see the visual clarity. We've seen so many buffs to this over time, and now we're seeing a recoil pattern buff. You throw any sight on this, and you now have a lot better visual clarity. The damage on this is extremely high. You can feather this. As long as you're not overheating this, you can treat this like that Devotion that had the purple mag before it was nerfed, and you can just mow down an entire team as long as you just let your finger off the trigger when you're switching targets. It's that strong. So the L-Star, I think, is going to be a gun that you're going to see more and more of as people get more used to it going into the later parts of this season. I think the L-Star has the highest potential of the energy guns that are in that assault rifle type category outside of, say, the Volt. So because of that, the L-Star for me is a healthy B tier this season with the potential to move up. Also, another gun that moves up is the Havoc. The Gold Havoc is part of this season's package as well, and it's on the ground. The Golden Havoc with the turbocharger also has a 2x multiplier on headshots, and so with the Havoc being as strong as it is and some of the changes that we've continued to see to the recoil pattern, which we have seen it be too strong as a result, but I think right now we're in that category where it's right in a pretty healthy spot, and if controlled even remotely accurately, just trades out better than almost any gun in the game. It's insanely strong. So the turbocharger on the Havoc has this potentially at an A tier as well. I think that we'll see if people do enjoy this, but with the R9 coming back, it's kind of made everything else an afterthought. But guns like the L-Star and the Havoc both have potential to be an A-tier gun or at least a high B-tier throughout the season. The Devotion, well, we saw the Devotion be way too strong in Season 6. We saw the nerfs, and that brought it down to a B-tier. I'm not going to go into too much about that. Enough has been said about the Devo. I think it's a healthy B-tier with the potential to be a really fun gun late in the game. If you throw a turbocharger on that, just start going into those last fights that are much more close quarters. The other guns at this tier, the Hemlok. We saw some nerfs to the Hemlok. We knew it was going to be OP. We know that there's some certain streamers out there looking at no Coco buffs that absolutely loved the Hemlok for a long time. We saw the buffs, and then it became a burst fire gun that became way too strong, and a lot of people said, you know what, maybe this is too OP. I think that it's been healthily balanced and could easily be an A tier if that is your flavor. Throwing a 3x on this is very common for a lot of people to go into single fire mode, and so they've tried to take some of the power away from the burst fire and kind of made sure that it isn't too OP, but it's still a very strong gun and a healthy B+ tier for sure. Another gun that's kind of found itself in similar fashion was the Scout. We've seen the Scout have huge buffs and then subsequent nerfs immediately after because it was way too strong. And so we've seen the Scout taken down a notch. This is still one of the better guns. This is another gun that's a golden gun this season. So we've seen a lot of golden Scouts being played with so far early in Season 7. And I think that this is another healthy B tier, B+ tier gun. The Scout still very strong at getting that poke damage. There's a lot of perches. There's a lot of head camping that you can do on Olympus. And there's a lot of ways to utilize the Scout, making it a very strong gun here in Season 7. Last up on the B tier, the EVA 8. There are the people that will absolutely love the EVA 8 over the Mastiff, and they swear up and down that it's A tier. I disagree. I think most people that you see at the top of their game also still love the Mastiff. They still think that that one-shot potential of just hitting for 110 plus is going to be way too high with the Mastiff. The EVA can be very good in a lot of situations, don't get me wrong, but I think that normally the Mastiff is going to beat out that EVA 8. But I think the EVA 8 is still definitely the stronger of the shotguns when you consider all things that are going on there. But the Mastiff tends to win out in a lot of those trades. Okay, moving to A tier, there's two guns that I've put here that I've always teetered on being A- or B+ guns. And when the R99 went to the crate in Season 6, both of these guns became very popular in their own right. One of those, the R301. This has been the most consistent gun throughout all of Apex Legends. It's almost foolproof. The spray pattern was nerfed over a year ago, but it has remained to be one of the best guns in the game for basically all skill levels. Everybody from really high ranks to low ranks all can utilize this gun. With the R99 back, the R301 has taken a step back for some of those higher level players as they refocus onto the R99. For everybody else that's playing, the 301 is still really good at that mid-range for those that can't really control the R99 the same way that a pro player can. So the 301 I think is an A- tier. If you're at the really high levels, I think it's at a healthy A tier at every other level. And depending on how much you love the R99, you might just consider this to be a really high B+. So the R301 is here. As far as another gun that got some love when it came to the R99 being created, the Flatline. The Flatline all of a sudden started to rise up. The more Season 6 went on, the more the Flatline became more popular. Same for the Prowler that had started to creep up in power level with all the buffs it got. The Flatline had the similar thing to where the Flatline now all of a sudden said, you know what, this thing does a lot of damage, and everybody started to recognize the Flatline as good. I will say that despite the Flatline being really strong, the R99 is back to being the super meta gun, but the Flatline I think is an A- tier. This is the first time I'm putting the Flatline on the A tier because it's such a low A tier gun, but a high B tier gun that I think that we finally give it the respect it deserves. The Flatline does a lot of damage. It's got a 2x multiplier on headshots, meaning that you can do a lot of damage with this if you are hitting those headshots, and it can really out-trade an R99 if you do find a way to control that. The one thing about the Flatline is its spray pattern, making it difficult to somewhat control, but I think that a lot of people started to get used to it once the R99 took a back seat for a season, and so the Flatline rose in prominence. People got practice with it, and it became very good, myself included. So I think the Flatline, for the first time for me, is an A- tier, potentially B tier. Some of you will swear that it's not that strong, but I think we've all had those traits with the Flatline where it can be really good, and we've seen more and more people taking this into the late game. For your other A tier guns, the Wingman, it has a new attachment. The quick draw on it is definitely noticeable. Sometimes you open up with an R99 and then you switch for that one tap, two tap kill on the Wingman, and that fast quick draw will be there. Or the other way where you have the Skull Piercer where it's still doing that bonus damage. The Wingman's still the cream of the crop for those. It's a hit or miss. It's a feast or famine gun. But for high skill players, the Wingman's still very prominent and still very strong. For low skill players, they probably don't like the Wingman as much, but when it's hitting, it's hitting. If you're practicing and using it consistently, your accuracy It's going to get much better. If you're not using it frequently, you're probably just going to miss your shots and you think the gun is bad. I don't blame you. Move on to something else. That 301, the R99, the Flatline are all going to be there. Now, the SMG that took over for the R99 while it was gone in Season 6, the Volt. The Volt, definitely not as strong as the R99 in most people's situations, but the Volt is still a very respectable gun and a A-tier gun. I don't think it's going to drop from here. It's still very strong, but I think everybody enjoys the R99 more. It's much easier to control, more accurate, but the Volt does still have that viability for an A tier if you don't have an R99, or let's just say, hey, you know what? Everybody's got the light ammo. I need something with energy ammo. The Volt is normally going to be that. This is much more common at higher levels, less common at lower levels, but the Volt, because of its accuracy, because of its spray pattern, because of its consistency, does tend to be a very good gun at all skill levels for an SMG, and so I think the Volt deserves the A-tier treatment. The Mastiff, I mentioned this when I talked about the EVA 8, the Mastiff still being at the top of the crop. When it comes to the shotguns, this is indisputable. It has great damage at range when you choke it up a little bit, which technically it's not choking, but it tightens the spray pattern when you do ADS. And even if you're not ADSing, the spray pattern on this is very forgiving, thus making the Mastiff still the strongest shotgun in the game, outside of course, the PK that's going to be in the crate, which we're not really talking about in this video. And then lastly, I've talked about it probably too much at this point. Listen, we're tired of hearing you talk about it. The R99, yeah, it's back. It's still the king of the guns. It's still what everybody's running. The R99, if you are not using the R99, you need to practice this. Spend a day, spend an entire weekend, spend an entire week, get used to the spray pattern on this thing. It fires really fast. This spray pattern is actually really easy to learn, and this is still the king of the crop when it comes to everything that everybody utilizes in this game. The R99 can be a mid-range gun, it can be a close-range gun. It's literally good for basically every fight. It can be your primary, it can be your secondary. There is almost no downside to having the R99 unless you say, well, it's not that good without any type of mag. Sure, okay, I get it. But by the time the game is over, you'll have that mag, and you've been carrying fights with the R99. This thing is back. Everybody at the high levels is happy. Everybody that gets melted by it is not happy, and that's just the way it goes. The R99 still one of the best guns in the game at the top tier, along with some of these other guns that we mentioned here. The Flatline falls behind it. The Volt tends to be behind it right now, but still very competitive are those guns. But right now, the R99 basically in a league of its own, and I think rightfully so, but some of you might not feel the same way. But right now, everybody, the consensus at the highest tier, the R99 best gun, and throughout is going to be there. So that's the tier list. Let me know in the comments what you think below. What is your favorite gun? Where did I go wrong here? Also, what is your favorite loadout? For me, right now, I'm going back and I'm loving the Wingman R9. I'm loving an R9 Mastiff. There's a lot that's going on there, but I won't even hesitate to run an L-Star right now. And Flatline still feels really good. The Volts feels really good if we're contesting. If I'm running with friends and they're contesting for light ammo, I'll switch to that Volt. I'll switch to that Flatline. I'll be doing that. But the L-Star is the #1 gun I'm keeping an eye on for this season to potentially rise up and have some of the more bigger highlight plays that I think we'll see as Season 7 goes on. So let me know what you think is going to be the big surprise gun. What are you happy about in buff, nerfs? And, well, do you actually enjoy the R99 coming back? Or are you one of those people that wish it just stayed in the crate? Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gaming content and other Apex Legends videos that will be coming to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, happy hunting. See you again.